Well, I want to thank you for inviting me to share a little bit about Carl Hoveland and give you some of my remembrance of Carl. It might be a little bit different than what you expect. I think everybody understands Carl's scientific accomplishments and his teaching capabilities and his outreach that he did in his life. But I really want to share with you some of the more humanitarian aspects of Carl, because I think that's really the way he would want to be remembered. I'm going to do this in 6 short chapters, and here are the titles: the obituary, Auburn sabbatical, saying goodbye to Dorothy, travels with Pat, kindness costs nothing, and then finally the founding fathers. His obituary, which he wrote himself as it was published in the Athens Banner Herald, reads as follows: Carl S. Hoveland died at the age of 93 in Athens, Georgia on July 4th, 2021. He was born October 25th, 1927 on a dairy farm near Sand Creek in northwestern Wisconsin. All 4 of his grandparents came from southern Norway, and Norwegian was Carl's first language. Frugality and hard farm work taught him valuable lessons as they survived the Great Depression. After education in a one-room elementary school and high school, he obtained a BS and MS degrees in soils at the University of Wisconsin, which was briefly interrupted by service at the U.S. Marine Corps, the Aviation Division. After working 3 years as a forage agronomist at Texas A&M Research Station in southwest Texas near the Mexican border, he earned his PhD in forages and animal nutrition at the University of Florida. His productive professional career covered 22 years of forage research, teaching, and extension at Auburn University in Alabama, and 25 years at the University of Georgia, where he was a Terrell Distinguished Professor, retiring in 2006. He was a fellow in the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society, American Society for the Advancement of Science, and received the Silver Medallion Award from the American Forage and Grassland Council. His exciting career included a great deal of international travel for consulting, invited lectures, and teaching in many countries around the world. Study periods in New Zealand and teaching in China and Republic of Georgia were some of his favorites. One of his proudest achievements was co-authoring with Don Ball and Gary Lacefield a popular color illustrated book, Southern Forages for Livestock Producers, now in its 5th updated edition as of 2015, and translated into Spanish and Chinese. It is also used as a textbook in 60 universities and colleges. During retirement, he continued to work on professional writing projects that were published. He also wrote published a book of childhood memories, Sand Creek, A Childhood Legacy, a book of photos from his world travels, and personal books on 28 years with his first wife, Dorothy, and 23 years with his late wife, Patricia. Even though he had no musical talent, he loved classical music and enjoyed concerts of choral, symphonic, and opera at the excellent University of Georgia School of Music, where he established perpetual graduate fellowships for students. He was an active member of the Episcopal Church, practicing his faith by loving and giving to others. Carl is survived by 3 children, who are actually his stepchildren, 5 grandchildren, and by his sister Hannah at Whitewater, Wisconsin. He is predeceased by his beloved wives, Dorothy and Patricia. I want to make one comment about giving to others here. In 2019, I got his tax records to use as a template for 2020 and 2021 because I was responsible for that. And he made over $200,000 and gave away all but about $80,000 of that to various charity organizations. So he was a true humanitarian, by all senses. Okay, so he married his wife, Dorothy, and they spent a little time in Texas and some in Florida. And he went to work at Auburn University in late 1950s. And Carl took a lot of sabbaticals and traveled all over the world. And I just generated this world map to illustrate to you exactly where Carl had been. And if you look at these places that he did sabbatical, you'll notice that they're all in very temperate regions of the world. And you would think that he was interested in temperate agriculture, but actually the true reason for him doing this is because his wife Dorothy had a debilitating disease. It was never diagnosed what it was, but he traveled to all these subarctic and temperate regions to provide her relief from her disease. Her disease was that in the summertime, she would suffer from low blood pressure, low blood oxygen. She would have tremendous convulsions, headaches, body aches, and really almost to the point of death in some cases while they were in Alabama. So they knew that it was associated with heat. They didn't know why, but he developed a lot of his sabbaticals strictly from the standpoint of he wanted to give Dorothy some relief from her debilitating disease. So this is where he went to as a tribute to Dorothy and to provide her comfort. While they were on sabbatical in South Africa, Dorothy went into the hospital down there and went through a period of decline over about 4 or 5 days. Carl spent 3 days at her bedside during that period, never leaving Dorothy while she was hospitalized. And she just continued to go downhill. And Carl shared his last remembrances of Dorothy, his last moments with Dorothy in his book that he wrote about her. And he wrote, Dorothy continued to talk in short sentences about the happy events in her life as she struggled to breathe. Our last conversation between 10:30 and 11 p.m. when she was still coherent was a prayer of thanksgiving for the gift of 28 years together. I took Dorothy's hand and she squeezed it a bit, and then she quietly slept away at 12:40 a.m. Friday, August 24th, 1979. I kissed her lovely face again and again as I cried. And he did that for about 4 hours before the nurse finally came and got him and said that he needed to have a rest. She gave him a sleeping pill and a bed to sleep in, and then they went ahead and took Dorothy's body. To understand exactly why Carl was so distraught, I mean, he knew that she was going to die, but he was so distraught when she passed away. And the reason for it was the way that they connected with one another. When Carl left the farm in Wisconsin after high school and went to the University of Wisconsin, he was a very awkward, introverted, not a very self-confident individual. And he had cousins that tried to build relationships with blind dates and things like that. But Carl never really got along with any of them. And one day out of the blue, this lovely young lady asked Carl if he would like to go to a musical event, a Christmas musical event at the University of Wisconsin. And that event was Handel's Messiah. And it was Carl's first experience to classical music, but he thought it was the most beautiful thing that he had ever heard. And after that concert, he and Dorothy had all sorts of conversations about religion, about politics, about science. She was actually a nurse's aide and actually probably knew a lot more about biology than a lot of nurses do anyhow. But she and Carl just connected on all sorts of philosophical and personal levels. So, he just absolutely fell in love with her. He told me that he worshiped her. And that she also, Hannah, his sister, told me that she worshiped Carl as well. So it was very difficult for Carl to say goodbye to Dorothy at that time. But that was in 1979. In early 1980s, University of Georgia was able to coax Carl away from Auburn University to the University of Georgia, where he taught and did research. While he was making his transition, he was purchasing a condominium, and the real estate agent that was helping him with that condominium was trying to set him up with a friend of hers. And it turns out that that Carl wasn't interested with the friend, but he was interested in the real estate agent, who was Pat King at the time, that later became Pat Hoveland. She also was a very outgoing, gregarious individual and loved to travel. So they continued Carl's saga of going places. And I just wanted to show you the pictures of where they went to. And in a couple of cases, they went to more tropical areas, Mexico, in China. They went to Korea in the summertime, which can be very hot, and Japan in summertime, which can be very hot. But Pat wanted to go to the Orient, so Carl accommodated her, and he took her there. And again, it was sabbaticals for teaching. So he managed to combine personal desires and professional desires at the same time. Carl did not have his own children, but Pat had 3 children, which were Carl's stepchildren then. And he told me that he had a great sense of joy whenever Pat's children would call him dad. And I'll share a little bit about that, some more about that later on. But in talking to Carl and telling him how much joy I have from my own children, he told me that that was a big void in his life. So that when her children would call him dad, then that just made him feel whole in many ways. Carl shared with me that he was fortunate enough to have married 2 women that he could absolutely worship. Unfortunately, he outlived them both. And when Pat died in 2012, a number of us faculty members, co-faculty members would, visit Carl, ask him, to give his opinion on some of the research project that we had going on. Took him out to lunch oftentimes, and to keep him motivated and keep him going. And he was writing all these books and coming to campus a lot anyhow. He and I used to walk together at lunches and things like that. One of Carl's mantras was that kindness costs nothing. And it didn't matter who you went to. After his death, I had to go and visit with various professionals about, either his finances or legal affairs. I go to the bank and visit with a teller, transferring money from one account to another. Every one of them, without any question and without any hesitation, the first thing they would say was what a kind and gentle man Carl was. And his hospice caretakers, who Carl called his angels, told me that he was one of the most kindest and gentlest individuals that they had ever met. And here they were taking care of him. They started taking care of Carl after he had a stroke in November of 2020. And from December 2020 all the way till July 4th, 2021, they were there providing him 24/7 care. And they got to know him as well as anybody, rated his books, and would stimulate him. But his stepchildren, I think, used his example of kindness and his treatment of other people to the greatest effect of anybody that probably interfaced with Carl. And each one of them have told me since his death that Carl, by the way he treated their mother, brought a lot to their lives. They grew up in a dysfunctional family. Pat's first husband was an alcoholic and abusive husband. And that's what the stepchildren knew as a family. But when Carl married their mother and showed the kind of kindness and love that he had for her, that each one of them told me that they had improved their own marriages by mimicking Carl's experiences of kindness and compassion and love towards their mother. So I think that's a great attribute and a great banner that Carl carries with him. The final chapter I call the Founding Fathers, and the reason why I call it that is because when Carl first had his stroke and we got him back to his apartment with hospice, he was just babbling, and he didn't make any sense, had no coherent thoughts or anything like that. And I would go and visit 4 or 5 times a week just to make sure that the hospice caretakers were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And initially it was strictly for that reason. But then Carl, one day, just started telling me about all the people that were in the pictures on the wall in his bedroom. And he told me about all of his family members and his mother, and how his father was a hardworking dairy farmer but didn't appreciate education, and things like that. And he'd tell him that to me over and over and over again. Finally, Carl got to the point where, he became very coherent, and we would have various discussions about religion, about politics. And one of the things that really stuck out with me was the integrity of the founding fathers, a discussion that we had on that subject. And Carl's two favorite founding fathers were John Adams, because John Adams was a very highly principled individual, and Thomas Jefferson, not because of Thomas Jefferson's principles, but because Thomas Jefferson was a great big idea guy. And so it turns out that both those individuals, they started out good friends early during the Revolution, became political enemies, and at the end of their lives became friends again. And they both died on July 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, John Adams at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I don't know whether it's by design or coincidence, but Carl passed away on July 4th, 2021 at 3 o'clock p.m., exactly in between the times of Jefferson and Adams' death. I think, Carl just is one of these individuals that no matter who you talk to, on a national level, international level, community level, they all admire Carl because of his kindness and because of gentility. I just want to share that with everybody because I think that's really his legacy, his greatest legacy.